Welcome back to The Yarn, and we have Erin Reily from YIMBY, which is code for yes in my backyard, a counter to the major scourge of NIMBYism, which is people and institutions stopping the development of new housing in people's respective backyards. So welcome to you, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me. Apologies if you can hear my kids in the background. It's
No,
dinner time.
that's good. That happens to me sometimes as well. So I guess I'm interested in why you set YIMBY.
Yeah, absolutely. So, YIMBY Sydney was a genuinely grassroots and kind of came out of a very specific situation where a couple of different people went to a West Council in Sydney meeting to oppose some plans for some new heritage areas. From what I understand. And they got together at the pub afterwards and had a chat, and Sydney became from that. Which I can't remember if it was the heritage areas or or in support of some upzoning, but one of the two. And they're two things that that both those people and those of us who have joined since have realised is a real problem. It's local councils in particular are really constraining the supply of housing, and a small number of really loud voices who are opposed to projects have disproportionate influence. So we're looking to organise a counter voice for those people.
Okay, so the catalyst for YIMBY was disappointment about the judgments made by individual councils.
I think it was a broader, it's broader issues, of course. The issue of housing affordability is front and centre for people of my generation. You know, I'm Gen Y, but I'm an older Gen Y, so I'm heading close to 40. But so many of my peers are struggling to enter the market at all, even at 40. And many people younger than us are saying that they think it might not be possible for them ever. So it's clearly a real issue. It's an issue I've looked at and I've cared about for a really long time. And I know a lot of the people in Sydney YIMBY have. It was more that we realised the power of organising and of getting together, amplifying each other's voices and organising to counter these entrenched NIMBY voices that tend to have a lot of power.
Yeah, okay, so let's just strip it back a bit. So
Yeah.
the general view is that housing is unobtainable for younger people, and that's largely been driven by planning policies and the administration of local councils, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so unless there is a body of people protecting the interests of younger Australians, then there'll be a risk that we continue on this path of building too few houses.
Yeah. So, or building houses in the wrong places, building houses where there isn't infrastructure, building houses where it's more expensive. A house in a greenfields development costs the state $75,000 more than a house than an infill property. So we're pushing to the fringe. We're pushing into some really ecologically sensitive areas, floodplains, those sorts of things. Meanwhile, we've got all this R2, which is single family home zoning, really close to our train stations, and really close to our cities. You can buy a single family home within 5Ks of the CBD, and there's a lot of those properties. And a lot of people who bought those properties 20, 30 years ago for a fraction of what they're worth today, they're sitting on all the benefit of all this infrastructure investment and the growth of our city. And meanwhile, the rest of us are getting pushed out to the fringes.
Yeah, okay. So the objective is in simple terms, is to get better planning laws as well as push local councils. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So both we're looking at all three levels: state, federal, and local. And our goal is housing abundance. So to change planning policy in particular, um, in favour of more housing, particularly medium density infill. That's what we think is the long-term solution to the problem, especially around existing infrastructure.
Okay. I want to ask you a bit about the different tiers of government because I think that they can be different personalities can be attracted to them, and you probably have a unique perspective now in this role at YIMBY. So, I mean, what is the issue with the local councillors? Do you think that they are sometimes captured by particular vested interests, or what is it in particular that local councils are doing, and why do you think that they're doing it?
Look, I think they're acting in the interests of their communities, and I think in a lot of the time they're reflecting the views of the people they hear from in their communities. But if you hold a session about a rezoning at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, it's no surprise that the people you're going to hear from are disproportionately homeowners, a lot of retirees. And so that feedback then gets taken, and the view is that this is unpopular, so it doesn't go ahead.
So, you are in a position to look at different tiers of government
Yeah.
because of your work on housing, and you, as you've said in your own words, identified as a problem that is shared across the different tiers. So, can you talk to me a little bit about, in particular, to start with, talk about local government and what you think drives local government to make poor judgments?
So I'm actually coming to this as a community engagement professional. That's what I do in my day job.
Yeah.
And I have seen firsthand over and over again how powerful a small group of opponents to a local project can be. And councils are very close to their local communities and they respond to those incentives,
Mhm.
which is to be expected. The problem is we have a citywide problem and we
Yeah.
have a whole group of councils, none of whom are particularly motivated to solve it in their local government area. So
Mm.
the state's done some work in New South Wales to put housing targets uh, for for each council, um, but we still don't have these statewide solutions for what is a city and statewide problem and a national problem. So unfortunately, those rezoning changes primarily happen at local government level.
Okay, so in terms of the councils, your assessment is that it's not an issue of corruption or anything more nefarious. It's an issue of people responding to the loudest voices and people being engaged by people that have more time.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think also a part of it is um, a lot of people live in these communities. They love the low density inner city life. They love the
Mm.
character of those communities, and they see more development as a threat. And so they're looking to protect their local communities. There's a great academic out of the US who's done a lot of research in this space, and she chooses not to use the term NIMBYs. She calls them neighborhood defenders. And she's still quite critical of the way their power and influence is used to keep people out. Um, but I think it's quite a useful term and I think it's quite insightful.
What about the role of heritage protection for local councils? I mean, where do you see that as a legitimate thing and where is it illegitimate?
Look, I probably have stronger views on this than perhaps some of my colleagues within YIMBY, but I certainly think we're seeing it being there are councils where it's over 30% of the LGA area is heritage protected or has a heritage overlay. And there's a real mismatch between how the community values heritage and how
Mm.
much emphasis councils are putting on heritage.
Mm.
And we're certainly seeing councils are using heritage as a de facto anti-development tool. Um, so I think there are some standards as to what that they need to meet for something to be heritage listed, but it's a list of 7 criteria. And as long as they meet one of those criteria, it's considered legitimate. So I think we need some more stringent and some policies that balance the need for people to have homes versus the need to preserve heritage. And I think that those things are in tension in a way we don't always recognise, that when we're heritage listing things, no one item is going to prevent people having homes. But once we do it at this scale that it's happening at, it absolutely is. Even my local LGA recently had a consultation around dramatically expanding their map, and lo and behold, 2 of the 3 new landscape conservation areas, which is sort of a heritage for view and land, 2 of the 3 were on the market as potential development sites. So it's hard not to see a correlation there.
Okay. And then moving on to the state. So the state has planning controls.
Yep.
So what can the state, maybe you start with, what is the state doing wrong at the moment? And let's just confine our comments to the state of New South Wales, because I'm a senator for the state and I'm particularly interested in the good governance and welfare of the people of New South Wales.
I don't think they're being bold enough, and I think we'd all agree. We're starting to hear some good rhetoric, but we need to see the action to meet the rhetoric. We've got a $20 billion metro project about to open, and they're talking about upzoning in around 7 total of the stations. Why every station that's getting a new metro isn't automatically being upzoned is really beyond me. I think it makes perfect sense if as a state we're making that kind of investment, that resource should be shared more widely. And certainly there are communities where there are single family homes within walking distance of these incredible new metro stations. And I think that's a bit of a policy failure. So at the state level, there's state environmental planning policies, SEPs, and they override local policies. So the SEP is always more powerful than the local policy. And so we'd like to see the state come in and make some pretty robust SEP around rezoning around transport infrastructure.
Yeah. But what about the planning code? What about the planning laws in New South Wales? How are they going, do you think?
So it's a really complicated process. And there's the zoning issue, and then there's the once you've actually got a DA. There are state ways of overriding the local government approval process, both for zoning, rezoning, and for DAs. And so as an organisation, we're certainly keen on having more state government control of those things where councils aren't showing themselves to be acting in good faith and meeting their housing targets. Okay,
so does the state government come in to punish councils that aren't doing the right thing?
They haven't yet. There's been talk that sort of the big stick is being waved, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think it's overdue. The state government's fairly new and is still putting together its policies, but I'd very much like to see, I think as an organisation, we'd very much like to see local councils that aren't meeting their targets, and meeting their targets in ways that are accessible for first home buyers, for renters. We'd like to see them, maybe the state government, play a bit of a bolder role.
And do you think that the tool that would be used would be sufficient to actually create more development? Like, for example, if a local council had failed in its duty to achieve an appropriate amount of new houses and the state wanted to intervene, how would it do that? Would it set its own target, and how would that work?
I think it could. There's a couple of different ways, but I think what we'd see is the state government stepping in on approvals. So the problem isn't that the projects aren't there. The problem is the projects aren't getting approved.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of problem around the math for what makes a development viable. And we're really keen on the sort of 6 stories-ish. That seems to be about where things become lucrative enough for developers that it makes sense to do them, but still palatable to local communities.
I guess the thing I don't understand, Erin, is why would a council be wanting to deny itself all that new rate revenue by not approving new developments?
Because they want to get re-elected. And there are so many people who are so vocally against these projects that if they're seen to be in favour, they'll lose at the next election before the new revenue even comes in. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they really are that myopic.
Yeah. But it seems to be like, I mean, on the mathematics here, that there are, as the millennials and the Gen Zs wash into the system, I mean, it's going to be weight of numbers in favour of development.
And we already know that it is. The problem is those people aren't the ones who are being heard. And to some extent aren't voting along those lines. I don't think a lot of people are making a particularly strong case for it politically at election time. But we have a really good example. We did some work in Mortdale recently where they were looking to upzone around the railway station just to 6 stories. And we attended the meetings and organised locals to go. And there's a whole party there that was created for that local election, very much on an anti-development, for the most recent local election, very much on an anti-development platform. So this particular master plan that they were voting on, people had been voted in almost purely on a platform against this master plan. And it was really gentle. We're not talking 20 stories. We're talking about 6 stories in a couple of places around a train station. The community got very, very active around it. And, when we were in the audience, one of the guys said they should all move to Picton, about where all the young people should live.
Yeah, well, that's not a solution for many people.
I live near Picton, so it's fine for me, but
it's not a solution for everyone. I mean,
no,
not going to work for most people in Sydney.
No, and I'd like to be home to read my kids a bedtime story every night, but the days I work in town, I'm not home in time.
Yeah. So let's talk about the role that the Commonwealth could play here.
Yeah.
Now, the Commonwealth has announced that it will pay the states to build houses, but it hasn't tried to do anything other than that. It's perhaps reflective of its position as a body that is not directly involved in a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
But I mean, what do you think the Commonwealth could do here to help?
Well, one thing we, as an organisation, quite like is making transport funding conditional on upzoning, where the federal government provides funding for new transport projects, that it is contingent on upzoning in the areas around where that transport is provided, particularly public transport. That's probably that's one of my favourites. Excuse me. Other things we like are removing parking minimums from developments. So where the federal government is delivering projects, for example, defence housing, modelling what good urban form can be, and part of that is getting rid of parking minimums and encouraging walkability. And it's also the role the government has in non-market housing. So we, as an organisation, believe that there is both a market and a non-market component to solving the supply problem. And obviously the government has more of a role to play in that non-market component generally. While that is primarily a state issue, there's obviously opportunities for funding there.
So the Commonwealth's going to pay New South Wales to build how many houses?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, okay. I think it's quite a few.
Yeah.
And it will be paying those, I imagine, after they're constructed.
From what I understand, it's a bonus paid to the state, and it's divided up. It's a set amount, and it's divided up based on the states that meet their quotas. And this New South Wales quota is about 77,000 a year over the next 5 years.
Yeah, okay. But there must be other things the Commonwealth could do to help incentivize good behaviour here. I mean, what about incentivizing having a simple, clean planning code or something like that?
Yeah, or pattern books are something we really like, which they used a lot in the sort of, I think, 20s, 30s, where you have developments that are essentially already approved, that they're designed, they're ready to go, and developers can pick up that project, customize it for the site, but it eases the process of approval. And that also opens up the market a lot for more medium-sized developers. So you're not just relying on your Mirvacs and your Meritons to deliver huge, 40, 50-story buildings. You can also get these medium density developments driven by smaller developers and upskilling smaller developers. And I think that's absolutely a role that the federal government could play. Also, there's the skills issue. There's such a shortage of skilled workers, and broadening apprenticeship programs so that there are more and more people coming through the ranks who can build these homes, because that's going to be a real problem too.
So all your solutions are focused around the supply side, aren't they?
Primarily, yes.
Yeah. And
We
so what
think
do
it's
you
a supply problem, and we think there's a pretty clear evidence it's a supply problem.
Yeah, I mean, what else can be done to help tilt the scales in favour of first home prospective buyers and younger people, though? Are there other things that you've thought about?
Oh, the problem is a lot of the things that have been done in the past, all it's done is inflate the market. And it's really hard. I think it really needs to be a supply side issue. And I'm a recent first home buyer, have been through this myself, and the stamp duty, the reduction in stamp duty certainly helped us. But um, I think the biggest issue is getting people into homes, even if it is renting, because at the moment we've got a lower than 1% vacancy rate in New South Wales, and that is just incredibly low. And we're literally talking about shelter rather than sort of that financial benefit of being a homeowner. And we'd like to get there, but I think the biggest issue is just this supply and getting a whole bunch of new houses built, or new
Yeah,
homes built.
yeah, and I think that's right, and that's where I think our focus will be around how we can incentivise the states and the local councils to do the right thing in terms
Yep.
of planning and development. I mean, the other debate that kicks around here in Canberra is around the role of super, which I know is on the demand side, so might not be attractive to you. But I mean, I have a lot of constituents, younger people who write to me or talk to me and say, this is a big pool of money. If I could get access to that, if they're 35 or 37 or something, it would help me get to the point of having a deposit much more quickly.
The only problem with that, though, is that of your 20s and your early 30s are your best possible time to take advantage of compound growth. And if you're
Yeah.
taking that money out of your super account, then you're not going to have that 20, 30 years of compound growth before you retire. And it's sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, I understand that it's frustrating having it sitting there, but also it's a safety net that a lot of people are going to rely on.
The only problem with that is that it doesn't get many people off the pension, and everyone still needs a pension. So the system has a lot of flaws.
I think that I'm interested to see how much that's generational. Like someone like me who's been, I started work not that long after the super guarantee came in, as a teenager. I've got super that's been sitting there since I was 14. So I think that when you get people who've had it for their whole working lives starting to retire, I think that'll be a bit different.
Yeah, unfortunately, the IGR, the intergenerational report, shows that by 2060 we won't be much better than we are now. So
That's a shame.
yeah, well, I mean, I think I think I'm right in saying that the single determinant of your success in retirement, financially at least, is whether or not you're in a house rather than your super balance, wouldn't you say?
And we're seeing it particularly older women are the fastest growing, retired women are the fastest growing group of people who are experiencing homelessness in Australia.
Yeah. Okay. So, but effectively, your argument against the super is that this is more of a supply problem than a demand problem. And
Yep.
then you also assert the compound growth issue, which of course you can also get through investing elsewhere, including
Yeah. Yeah.
in your own house, right? So, okay. So then, what do you think we should be doing at the next elections? As I don't mean, politically, but I mean, what sort of organisation do you want to see from people under the age of 40 at the upcoming elections to try and put these issues on the agenda? Because to be honest with you, I don't feel that there's been enough focus on this in past elections.
No, I agree, and I don't think frankly, at the moment, I don't think it's been enough of an issue to sway votes, even though it's the number one or number two um, issue for most people recently. Cost of living tends to be first, but of course, housing and rent is really caught up in that as well. And then the cost of housing is second. So I think there needs to be some real leadership from political leaders who are willing to put some bold policies out there and understand that they're going to run across the spectrum of ideology, but have that conversation and have the conversation about are market mechanisms the best, are non-market mechanisms the best? And I think once the conversation is had, it's very clear that it's a supply issue. And I think that can be understood more broadly, and I think can move votes. I think the parties that have good plans to increase supply in the near future will do better.
Yeah. So how do you plan to engage at YIMBY in all the different parties? Do you have a plan to try and infiltrate all the political parties and their policies? I hope you do.
We're certainly talking. We are across the spectrum. I think
Good.
we've got members from every political party imaginable, and including some of the fringe ones. But that's okay. We're a broad church at Sydney YIMBY, and we're obviously quite vocal in our advocacy for certain policies. At the moment, we're very focused in Sydney YIMBY at the New South Wales government, so at state level. But we've had public support from both parties and saying that they're keen to see what we do and are encouraged by the activism. And we're certainly hoping to hold every party's feet to the fire to see some real action
Yeah.
on
Well,
that supply.
I think if we don't address your issues, I think the Liberal Party might become a fringe party. So we need to be very careful here, I think, because these are, I mean, if you go back through the Liberal Party's kind of history, I mean, we always had home ownership as a real bedrock of our political ideology, right? And I think I just worry that, every party has sort of put this on it's all too hard.
Yeah.
And it is hard, right? Which is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I think you've been able to step us through that. There's not a magic wand we can wave here in Canberra. I mean, what we can do is incentivize good behaviour that's my takeaway.
Yeah. And I think what we can also do is model how important it is to be involved in your local communities in saying yes, and in showing your local members, your local representatives at council level, how that you want to be a welcoming community, that you want to be a community that has a place for children to live near their parents, not with their parents. I think that we all have to change the politics on it, and we have to stop the people who have an interest in, keeping their view exactly the way it is, or their neighbour exactly the way they are. Stop them being the voices that are heard most of the time.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, we can't run Australia for the benefit of a few vested interests. We need to be looking after our citizens, and housing is a bedrock of success of our democracy and our society.
Absolutely.
So I think you're doing really important work. So if there's one thing that you think we should be doing here in the federal coalition in Canberra, what's one thing that we could be doing tomorrow if we were going to be doing our policy statement on housing tomorrow?
Well, like I said, I really love the idea of linking public transport funding to upzoning. I think that's a really practical thing. It could be done. It could be done quite easily, and it could have really significant effects.
Okay, well, fantastic. Thanks, Erin. Thanks for your time. It was really great to talk to you, and No doubt we'll see you and your YIMBY colleagues on the hustings over the next 18 months.
Thanks so much for having me.